What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where I, Graham Jason Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network. Today we're talking the latest episode of WWE 24 entitled Ric Flair, The Final Farewell. Now, if you're asking yourself, what's the significance of this special? Now, obviously, they've run down the final weekend of Ric Flair's WWE career, the grand retirement, or so we thought. But why are they airing this now a dozen years later? Honestly, I don't know. I really don't. This had nothing to do with TakeOver, aside from the fact that Charlotte was all over the special. She had just defended her NXT Women's Championship in the main event of TakeOver in Your House last night. Other than that, I really do not. I have no idea why they opted to air this when they did. It's not like it's his birthday, or I think he started wrestling in 1975. So unless this month marks 45 years, if my math is correct, since he started wrestling, I'm not really sure why they would air this now. Granted, I'm not complaining. This was a great piece of business. I thought they put in a lot of effort here, a lot of cool footage. The storytelling was great. We all know the story of Ric Flair's final weekend in WWE. But to see it in this type of form, because they didn't have 24s back in 2008, obviously, well before the network. I know they've talked about this before on the ESPN special, among other things. He had his own DVD come out since then about this. The ESPN one, the DVD was all right. The ESPN one is really one that I would recommend you go out of your way to watch. I don't know where it is exactly. I'm not sure if it's on ESPN Plus or whatever the hell it's called. It probably is. I'm not sure. But that came out, I want to say 3 years ago. Because I almost met him for the first time about 3 years ago at a Northeast Wrestling show, and the special came out right before he was supposed to be at that show, and then he had to cancel for whatever reason. Typical Ric Flair, because I was supposed to meet him again a year later at a Comic-Con in Rhode Island, and he canceled that too. So I can't say I'm surprised. I finally got the chance to meet him about a year ago at WrestleCon. It was a bit of a short experience. The video is up here on the channel, and it was cool and all. But that was well after the ESPN thing came out. Forgot to say how much I enjoyed that. It was very sad to a large degree, knowing the life and career of Ric Flair. But I thought this was very well done. The WWE, portion of it here on the network, entitled Ric Flair, The Final Farewell. So we go all the way back to the beginning here, to when Ric Flair talks about becoming a pop culture icon. That includes celebrities, singers, rappers, sport athletes, all these various people in the mainstream eye, in the public eye, that idolize Ric Flair, do the woo, do the dance, do the speech. I've seen these speeches for years, from pre-locker room, huddles and stuff before games, like the Indianapolis Colts. They showed footage of him here doing the whole, Jets, jet stealing, whatever. I can't do the whole spiel, but they were doing the Ric Flair spiel before their game. Really, really cool stuff. And he talks about how he wants to be remembered as not the guy that was barely getting through in the last 10, 15, 20 years of his career, but rather the guy from the 80s who was at the peak of his popularity and widely regarded as one of the, if not the greatest professional wrestler of all time. When he was at his peak, winning titles, all this other amazing stuff. And he talked about a WrestleMania 24 weekend was the biggest thing he has ever done in his entire life. Because wrestling is and was his entire life. Now, that doesn't surprise me, hearing that coming from him, but it is kind of crazy to hear him say, obviously WrestleMania Weekend 24 was very special, but to say it's the greatest thing he's ever done in his entire life over having his kids and not marrying his wife, because he's gotten married 4 or 5 times by this point, I think 4 times now. It's telling, because he said how wrestling is his life. But to put that over, to prioritize that over his own kids, not too sure about that. But hey, that's Ric Flair in a nutshell. I can't say I'm surprised. They show the press conference from right before the Hall of Fame in 2008. We hear Josh Matthews' voice for the first time on WWE programming, for the first time in a long time. He's emotional even at that point. And they were talking about how, someone asked a question about how are you holding your emotions together? And he's like, I'm not doing a very good job, because he was already crying well by this point. And he said that one of his biggest problems was that he was never able to have a bad time. He never had a bad time. Whenever he went out on the town and partied and stuff like that, he never had a bad time. And that was one of his biggest issues because he never knew when to stop. He's a big party guy, obviously. They show him hugging Dusty Rhodes backstage. Really cool shot there now knowing that, Dusty Rhodes has since passed on and whatnot. We see him with The Rock, who looks insanely different than, from what he does right now, from how he does currently. He's still got a head of hair, not like a full head of hair, but he still has hair. And he looks like The Rock was thrown in the fucking dryer for an hour. Like, he is not nearly as big here as he is now. It's crazy. And I know he was taking roles like the Tooth Fairy and the Game Plan and Race to Witch Mountain 2 and all this other shit back in 07, 08, 09. But once he started doing the serious roles in like early 2010s, it seemed like he really got in better shape, did roids, what have you, I don't know. I'm not really one to speculate, but some people would say that. But he is just a monster of a man. But to see him with Ric Flair and seeing The Rock pay his respects to the Nature Boy was really, really cool. So he talks about becoming the Nature Boy and how he's always been in Nature mode on or off screen. He's always the Nature Boy. We see Triple H inducting him into the Hall of Fame. And they get back to the Hall of Fame itself later, but, Ric Flair, or rather Triple H says about Ric Flair that Ric Flair was his idol, and that out of, idolizing Ric Flair, they became really, really close friends. They became best friends when Ric Flair came back to WWE and befriended Triple H. At, Triple H's behest, because it kind of seemed like Ric Flair, and I'll get to this later, didn't really know who he was when he came back to WWE back in 2002, but thanks to Triple H, he was reminded of who he was again, and that's really what got them closer more than anything else. They discussed the insane schedule that he had when he was the Nature Boy, and he talked about at one point, sometimes he would be on the road for like months on end, which does not surprise me considering the schedule they were running back then, but like, he said maybe at one point, maybe not multiple times, but at least at one point, he was away from home for 5 months. That's insane to me. Now, I know people who have significant others in the army and stuff like that deal with that type of shit all the time. But listen, being a professional wrestler is not like being in the Navy or the Army or what have you. It's just not. Not to say that wrestling isn't a respectable profession, but like to think that your significant other, probably your husband, because it's usually the guy that, that whatever, that's usually the case. To know that they're out there partying on the road, doing all this shit day in, day out without you for 5 months in a row, that's kind of crazy to me. I know that's just simply the lifestyle they've lived and did live and still do live to a certain extent, but you really got to love this, as Ric Flair does, to get through it. And granted, he's had 3 or 4 divorces, so I'm not entirely surprised. But at the same time, though, that was the lifestyle he lived and the lifestyle that he thrived off of and being away from home. He actually said, I don't know what was on the Stone Cold podcast a couple of months ago that I reviewed, and he says a lot of the same things here that he did there about how he enjoyed being away from home. Now, it makes him sound like an asshole, so they don't really paint that picture here. But he did say that in the podcast where he was like, I wouldn't even want to come home because then I would have to deal with all these problems. And it's like, dude, that's real life. You know what I mean? Like when you step out of the ring, you got to deal with real life. You got to deal with reality. And he just refused to. Like his wife would nag on him, blah, 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 blah. You got to do this while you're home. And sometimes he would just leave early to not even be home. Like that's just who he was and who he is, whatever. He talked about getting through and not really talked about it, but they do mention how he was going through a very expensive divorce way back when, and how he was with his new girlfriend by that point. Not the girlfriend that he has now, his fiance, wife, whatever, but whatever blonde that he was marrying at that point, or at least dating. They do show him with his kids. He was a very, good father. To a degree, he was barely home, but when he was home, Charlotte said, he was a very active dad, and we hear from Charlotte quite a bit on the special. She gets emotional talking about how Ric Flair made a lot of mistakes. Her dad made a lot of mistakes, but he's always owned up to every single one of them. We then hear from Ricky Steamboat, who of course knows Ric Flair better than most, given their legendary series of matches in WCW, the NWA, and so on in the late 80s. He talks about how Ric Flair became the on-air character that he was. He became that persona of himself outside of the ring as well. And we've heard this about a lot of different people, including, Hulk Hogan probably kind of leads the list for me. I don't know him as Terry Bollea. I know him as only Hulk Hogan. I don't look at Ric Flair as Richard Fleer or whatever his name is. I look at him as being Ric Flair in and out of the ring. That lifestyle that the character lived, he started to live that same lifestyle outside of the ring in real life. I think he talked about it again on the Stone Cold podcast. I apologize for all the overlap, but I think he said there he didn't really know when Stone Cold asked him, when Steve asked him, where does Ric Flair stop and where does Richard Flair begin? And he didn't really have an answer from what I can remember. I reviewed it here on the channel a couple of months ago, and it's been about 2 months. But he kind of gave one of those answers that indicated I really don't know. It's kind of one and the same. I'm so far removed from who Richard Flair was. Ric Flair is who I am now. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. He talks about Space Mountain and the origin of that and everything else. You know, if you've ever heard the Space Mountain line from Ric Flair, you probably know what he's talking about. No, nothing further needs to be said there. He talks and jokes about having to pay alimony to 3 women for all the divorces that he's had over the course of his life. And then we see him beating Vader for the WCW World Championship at Starrcade 1993. Great match, great moment. His kids were there, I believe. They had to have been because Charlotte talked about how it was one of her favorite moments ever of her father, having to be there and witnessing it live. And she also talked about how as her dad kind of winded down his career, and when I say winded down, I mean, I'm not talking the final 2 or 3 years of his career. I'm talking the final 15 years of his career. Because they mention how WCW didn't really see Ric Flair for being a, top priority. They didn't really see him as being Ric Flair from 10 years ago. They just saw him as some random old dude who was like, oh, anyone else. Except for the fact that he's Ric fucking Flair. You know what I'm saying? So the benefits in not really being on the road as much and not working as much was that he was able to spend more time with Ashley, that being Charlotte, and her brother Ric Flair. David, unfortunately, did not have that same luxury. David, I'm not sure if that was his firstborn. I know he has at least 4 kids. They showed 4 kids in the crowd for the Hall of Fame speech and the WrestleMania match and so on. I know there's David, Reed, and Ashley. I forgot the other son or daughter's name. But Ashley and Reed were lucky in that they got to spend more time with their dad than their other siblings did. And Flair felt that WCW kind of sort of wanted to get rid of him because Eric Bischoff, who was, leading WCW at that time, did not see Ric Flair the same way that other people did. Because, again, he didn't really get it. He didn't really see Ric Flair as being a legend, as this top draw. And although he really wasn't in 93, 94, 95, he's still Ric fucking Flair. The fact that he was still able to have some good matches in the tail end of his career in WWE means that he still could have done that in WCW for that final decade that he was there for, after leaving WWE for WCW in 92, 93. So from there, he talked about how he was losing his confidence, and Charlotte could kind of sense that. And even Ric Flair himself admits, I was broken. By the 90s, I was broken. I had no idea who I was at that point. We then fast forward to March of 2001, when WWE bought WCW. We see that footage again of Vince buying Nitro, on Nitro itself, buying the company, while Raw was simulcasting with Nitro back in March of 2001. It was soon after that Ric Flair got a call from Vince asking him, hey, pal, do you want to come back to work? That's a terrible Vince impersonation, but you get my drift. Ric Flair was one of those people that had a guaranteed contract, and his contract was, I believe, the first to have run up, right? Because Goldberg didn't come in for another year and a half until the spring of 2003. Hall, Hogan, and Nash did not come in until early 2002. Sting never came in. Who else was there? Scott Steiner didn't come in for another year until November of 2002. So a lot of these people had guaranteed contracts. Ric Flair was one of them, which is why he was not a part of the initial Invasion angle. He actually came in the day after. The day after Survivor Series, I think, 2001. And, Vince had told him right off the bat, we're not going to have you wrestle. You will not be wrestling here. And then little did he know, of literally 2 months later, he was wrestling Vince himself at the 2002 Rumble pay-per-view. He said that he was not proud of that match, and it's not a great match. It's fucking Ric Flair versus Vince McMahon. And granted, Vince had a great match, a great spectacle of a match with Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 19, but this was not that. He admitted that he was down on himself at that point, and Triple H, of all people, was the one to go up to him, and this was kind of what kickstarted their friendship and very close relationship. Ric Flair had to be told by Triple H himself, he goes, hey, listen, you're the only guy here that doesn't know that you're Ric Flair. Which is true. Ric Flair did not know that he was Ric fucking Flair and had to be reminded of such by the Game himself, who was a pretty established star, I would say, by 2002. You know, it headlined WrestleManias, won multiple world championships. Triple H, this ain't coming from any schmuck, or even Vince himself. This is coming from one of the most respected performers around that time in WWE. So Triple H worked out with Ric Flair before a Raw one night in the ring. And you kind of see from the footage that they show, which was great footage, by the way, that Ric Flair was slowly starting to regain his confidence again. And Triple H really wanted to instill that self-confidence back in the Nature Boy. So they show shots of Ric Flair facing The Undertaker at WrestleMania 18, great match, before joining Evolution later on in 2002. I think actually Triple H and Ric were feuding on TV. They may have had a match or two before Ric was like, oh, if you can't beat him, join him. And then he joined Triple H and became the de facto manager for Evolution by late 02, early 03. Ric Flair called it a great run that he was back for from 01 to 2008. But people, Triple H mentioned that Triple H, or rather the other wrestlers, were kind of worried for Ric Flair post-Evolution, because Evolution ran its course, wrapped up in mid-05, late 05. He and Triple H had some, again, very good matches on pay-per-view at Taboo Tuesday and a Steel Cage match at 05, Taboo Tuesday 05. And I believe again at Survivor Series in a Last Man Standing match, if I'm not mistaken. So they worked really well together, but after that feud ran its course, it kind of felt like they didn't really know what to do with Ric Flair. He was kind of just floundering. He was just kind of there. He just had matches here and there and whatnot. And in 06, 07, they showed footage of his matches with Edge, actually, from early 06. It was either a ladder match or a TLC match. Pretty sure it was a TLC match. I think the Raw after Edge won the WWE title at, New Year's Revolution 06, because I think Ric Flair was the Intercontinental Champion. Edge went for that belt. He, lost by DQ or something. And then he went on to cash in later on that night. So he and Ric were still feuding in January of 06. They had this crazy-ass match, which, for all intents and purposes, really Ric Flair should not have been involved in, considering his health at that point. And then he went on to have a fucking Money in the Bank ladder match 2 months later. I think still the oldest performer to this day to ever compete in a Money in the Bank ladder match, which, again, considering the person, does not surprise me at all. But Vince even told him, listen, dude, you're done. He called him to tell him you're done. I think this was by 07, because that's when the whole angle started about how if you lose another match, you're done, which was obviously part of the storyline. Because Ric Flair even admitted, hey, I would be wrestling until I'm 80 if I could. But Vince was the one to really put the hammer down and say, listen, you're done. You got to call it a career. So the decision was made to put him not only in the Hall of Fame, but also put him in a match for his final match against Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 24, and then call it a career then. Shawn Michaels talks about how he took it very seriously, almost too seriously, but he did not want to let Ric Flair down. In fact, he wanted it to be a final match that Flair could be proud of, which I fucking love. I mean, that sounds the same, sounds like kind of the same thing that Taker talked about with Shawn at 26, when Taker really wanted to make it a great final match for Shawn Michaels that night. That's kind of what it reminds me of, and Shawn, being as giving as he was at that point, wanted to do the same thing for Ric Flair, given his illustrious career, and wanted to give him one great final match that he could hang his hat on. So we see Ric Flair doing his Hall of Fame speech. Charlotte even says that she can't watch the footage back now, because you see Reed a lot in this footage. And of course, for those that don't know, Reed passed away, I think, in 2013. Alexis asked me while we were watching this, and she really enjoyed this. She asked me if Reed, she started wrestling before or after he passed away. It was definitely before. I think she was signed by WWE in either 2013 or late 2012, but I want to say late 2012. So she was already wrestling by the time that he passed away. Because I know she made her debut on NXT TV in the summer of 2013. So I find it hard to believe, she pursued wrestling right after he died. I think she was already kind of into it, but because of him. Because he idolized Ric Flair. He idolized his father. Charlotte mentions that. So anyway, she mentioned how Ric had a different relationship with each of his kids, which is kind of cool. We see the Hall of Fame speech from Triple H, who inducted him, from Ric Flair himself. He thanks Triple H afterward backstage we see him with Taker, we see him with Harley Race, we see him with I think John Cena was there, Jim Ross was another one, and JR even told him, listen, Ric, I'm going to give you all that I have tomorrow on commentary. I'm going to try to make this as special as possible, which is really cool to see. So from there, Charlotte even says that she regrets some of the things that she said to her dad. Maybe not at that point, but earlier on in his career, when she would say, why don't you just let go? Because she didn't get it. Of course, now she does because she's a wrestler. I would be shocked if she didn't. She admits as much later, saying, yeah, I get it now. I could see why he wouldn't want to let go. But she regrets some of the things that she was saying to him at that time, saying, listen, Dad, just stop. Just retire. Let your body rest. It's getting ridiculous at this point. Ric said he didn't want to go. I mean, the guy broke down crying before Mania in a pre-match interview saying, I don't want to go. You could clearly tell it was Vince's decision to have Ric Flair retire. And it wasn't his own. The guy, again, he went on to wrestle a year or two later. He actually went on to wrestle the very next year, before even the TNA stuff. He wrestled a match, I want to say in Australia, with Hulk Hogan, and Hulk Hogan's like summer tour or something like that. They did Hogan and Flair on those shows, which in 92 would have been amazing. Maybe even later on in the 90s in WCW, maybe. In 2009, it was a fucking shit show. I haven't seen the matches myself per se, but I can only imagine how bad they were. And that was what led him to wrestling in TNA soon after, which obviously none of that is discussed here, and I'll talk about that at the end. But they don't mention that, of course. Because TNA to them, I would say it doesn't exist, but they've actually come around to mentioning TNA more often now. Not really, I was going to say in the 24s, but they actually have with the whole Hardy Boys thing, among other things. They talk about it a lot on Table for Three and shows like that, and in Chronicle to an extent. But anyway, so he said that he didn't want to go, and Shawn Michaels, we hear from him, who says that he was staying real focused before the match, really wanted to make this thing as special as possible. They recap the match, which was great. I mean, it's far from like a 5-star Matt classic as it would have been, 10 years earlier. To be fair, though, Rick and Shawn, I want to say, had a match at one of those like Backlash Unforgiven pay-per-views, years earlier. I know Shawn and Orton had some matches, as well as Shawn and Batista. I'm sure Shawn and Flair had some matches during the Evolution days. It wasn't the same thing as it was here, because this was WrestleMania. It was Rick's last match. I mean, Rick was not Ric Flair at that point, so I'm sure it would not have been great even then. But I'm sure, modern day, not modern day Shawn, but like Shawn of 08-09 having a match with like 88 Ric Flair would have been fucking amazing. As great as this was, that would have been amazing for an entirely different reason, So they recap the match, really good stuff. They recap the whole, I'm sorry, I love you, boom, sweet chin music, it's all over. He kind of feigned putting Ric Flair away. Great match, great storytelling, great crowd, great atmosphere, great everything. Triple H says the exact same thing. He said he loved the match, it was perfect, and it was everything it needed to be. We see Rick getting a standing ovation afterward from the sold-out crowd in the, what is it, Camping World Stadium it's called now? I forgot what it was called originally. Maybe that is the old name. But I know they renamed it at some point. The Citrus Bowl or whatever. It's in, I know because I was fucking there for WrestleMania 33. But I know they renamed it at some point. It might be Camping World Stadium now. And if it isn't, it was something else originally. Either way, great reaction, great visual of Rick just standing in the middle of the ring crying as the crowd cheers him on. And other fans are crying in the crowd, including his family, and he greets them afterward. He actually thought that was it. He thought it was over. Had his final match, it's done. And then he gets a call to come to Raw the next night. And I know it's the post-WrestleMania Raw, and some special stuff did happen on that Raw, the years prior. But not to the extent that it happens now. I mean, way more now do we see people, come back or debut, and the post-WrestleMania Raw is such a big thing now. It wasn't as much back. I mean, Crime Time came back on that show. I remember seeing footage not too long ago, but Crime Time got fired, and they actually got brought back on that show the same night that Ric Flair had his final farewell. So, fun fact for whatever that's worth. But yeah, he got told to show up so he could give his farewell address. And all he was thinking was he would just go out there, thank the company, thank Vince, and have that be it. But Vince said, listen, don't go out there and thank me. Don't go out there and thank the company. Go out there and thank the fans and be Ric fucking Flair. Again, I'm sure he didn't say Ric fucking Flair, but knowing Vince, he may have, who knows. But he's like, just go out there and be you, which is exactly what he did. Because people wanted to see Ric Flair. They didn't want to hear about Vince. They wanted to hear about Ric Flair. So Ric Flair cuts a promo about how I'll never wrestle in this ring again, which technically is true. Technically. Because he never did wrestle again in WWE. So technically, he never did wrestle again in WWE. He wrestled in another ring a year later in Australia. And then he wrestled again in TNA 2 years later, so he wrestled in those rings, but never again in WWE for whatever that was worth. So he thought that was it. It was kind of cool when you see him put down the microphone, and then you hear Triple H's music play, and then you could obviously tell that Ric Flair was not expecting that, and he immediately, he kept it together for the entire promo, until he sees Triple H come out, and then he starts bawling all over again. And then legends upon legends upon legends pour out to pay their respects to the Nature Boy. And that includes, but not limited to, Ricky Steamboat, all of Four Horsemen. They have Harley Race out there. Jim Ross was, of course, already out there. Batista, Shawn Michaels, John Cena, Triple H himself, as I mentioned, the fucking Undertaker, and the rest of the entire roster. Literally anyone and everybody who has ever had an ounce of respect for Ric Flair was out there paying their respects. It was a really, really cool sight. One of the greatest moments in Raw history, and some of it even happened after the show went off the air. His family was in there. Just really emotional, amazing stuff. Randy Orton was out there too. He called, CM Punk, we saw him, Hornswoggle like everyone else. We see Orton call Flair the greatest of all time. And obviously he thinks very highly of Flair, so I get that and it makes sense. We see Vince come out as well. Big Show is out there crying his eyes out. Vince comes out and gives Flair a big old hug. And then Ric Flair even says, "It was the greatest weekend of my entire life." Charlotte admits, as I said earlier, that she gets it now. She could see why he wouldn't want to let go. Flair then jokes about winning 16 world titles, but then losing 17,000 matches. I mean, I think a lot of people forget that he lost a lot, but he did win a lot as well. So for as many times as he won the world championship, he would always lose it a bunch of times too. Therefore, hence why he's a 16-time world champion. He didn't hold it for very long. Overall he probably did, but he wasn't known for lengthy title reigns as much as he was, holding it many times. It's quantity over quality in this case, but that's not to say that his world championship reigns were bad by any means. But then he expresses simply gratitude for living the life that he has over the course of his life, not really coming to terms even all these years later for such a great weekend and being blessed with having such an amazing experience over WrestleMania 24 weekend. Again, this was phenomenal stuff. I've heard the story a million times in DVD releases, on ESPN, and now here and other WWE forms of media. But it never gets any less emotional. This was literally right before I started watching wrestling full-time. I was aware of the whole Ric Flair thing. I did not become a full-fledged fan until April of 2008, so literally 2 weeks later. I was not watching this Raw when it aired, when he gave his farewell address. But anyway, though, this was a great piece of business. My only real nitpick of it, and it's not really WWE's fault, knowing they can use the footage, it kind of, not that it bothers me, it's weird to call it the final farewell and then show footage of more matches that he had 2 years later. Kind of ruins the emotional feel that it has, which is why I would recommend the ESPN one. The ESPN one is a bit more real, because they cover the divorces in more detail, they cover the TNA run, and Jim Ross literally says, they show the WrestleMania 24 weekend match and moment and everything, and then they fade to black, and then they show Ric Flair showing up in TNA, embarrassing himself against Hulk Hogan and Sting. And you literally hear Jim Ross say, "Well, he needed the money. He needed the money." I don't know if I reviewed it here on the channel. I may have. I think I may have talked about it on Wrestle Rant Radio, my thoughts on the Ric Flair special. It was great. It was amazing. It was definitely depressing, more so than this one was. It's kind of hard to call it the final farewell when he wrestled again literally a year or two later. But whatever. In WWE, he has never wrestled again. So as far as the WWE Universe is concerned, where we don't acknowledge Impact and Ring of Honor for the most part and shit like that, then yeah, it was his final farewell. So in that respect, it was a nice send-off. But anyway, this was a great special. Definitely check it out right now on the WWE Network. It's not as long as some of the other 24 specials are. This one was only around 47 minutes, which sounds long, but a lot of the 24s are an hour, over an hour, hour and a half. The Edge one was a long one, I feel like. I don't remember exactly, but I can remember it being a bit lengthy, as it should have been because it was great. But this, even though it was on the shorter side, was also still very, very good. So check it out right now on the WWE Network. WWE 24 Ric Flair, the final farewell. Great stuff here. So be sure to like this video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more content. I'll be back in my next WWE Network and show video probably, what's today, Monday? Tomorrow is another installment of the MCU Rewatch Review Series, so check that out. A recap of Phase 1, with the Doc Chris Mueller and myself. And I'll probably be breaking down Raw Talk from tonight. So keep an eye out for that tomorrow here on the channel. It might not be a regular thing past, a couple of weeks from now. But for now, I'm going to watch it anyway, and I might as well review it, So keep an eye out for that as well tomorrow. Hashtag AskGSM on Wednesday. Wrestle Rant Radio excerpts on Thursday. Friday, the Season 5 finale of Total Bella's review going up on Friday. Saturday, my SmackDown review. And then Sunday, I forgot what's going up on Sunday in the network. I don't remember. If not, then I still have a backlog of all the Dark Side of the Ring reviews that I've already recorded. I just have yet to publish them here on the channel, so keep an eye out for those as well. Anyway, guys, have a great rest of your week. This is going up on Monday, so enjoy the beginning to your week. Enjoy Raw tonight. I'm Graham GSM Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.